Flight 427 was plummeting toward the ocean at 500 miles per hour. The cockpit was silent. The pilots were unconscious. And a 17-year-old girl who had never flown a plane in her life was the only person standing between 200 passengers and certain death. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. Mira Chun sat in seat to 3A, staring out the window at clouds that looked like cotton candy stretched across an endless blue canvas. She was on her way to visit her grandmother in Seattle, a trip she had been looking forward to for months. The flight attendants had just finished the beverage service. The captain had announced they were cruising at 35,000 feet. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Mira pulled out her phone, switched it to airplane mode, and opened her flight simulator game. She had been obsessed with this game for 2 years. Her friends thought it was weird that a teenage girl spent hours practicing takeoffs and landings on her phone. But Mira loved the precision of it, the way every control had a purpose, the way you had to think 3 steps ahead. She had completed every level, mastered every aircraft. Her high score was legendary among the online community. But it was just a game, just pixels on a screen. She never imagined that those countless hours would mean anything in the real world. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes into the flight. A strange smell drifted through the cabin. Sweet, chemical, wrong. Passengers started looking around, confused. The flight attendants noticed it too. Their trained smiles flickered with concern. Then the pilot made an announcement. His voice was calm but strained. He said they were experiencing a minor technical issue, nothing to worry about. They might experience some turbulence. Please remain seated with seat belts fastened. Myra noticed the flight attendants whispering urgently to each other. One of them rushed toward the cockpit. The chemical smell grew stronger. A woman to rows ahead started coughing. Then another passenger. Then 5 more. Mira pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth. Her heart was pounding. Something was very wrong. The plane lurched suddenly. Bags tumbled from overhead compartments. A child screamed. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a loud hiss. Mira grabbed hers and pulled it over her face. But the chemical smell was still there, getting worse. People were coughing violently now. Some were slumping in their seats. The flight attendant who had rushed to the cockpit came stumbling back. Her face was pale. She collapsed in the aisle. Mira unbuckled her seatbelt. Every safety rule she had ever learned told her to stay seated. But those rules were written for normal emergencies. This was not normal. She stepped over the unconscious flight attendant and moved toward the front of the plane. Other passengers were barely conscious. The chemical smell was overwhelming near the cockpit door. Mira tried. The handle locked. Of course it was locked. After everything that had happened in aviation history, cockpit doors were built like bank vaults. She pounded on it. No response. The plane tilted. Not dramatically, just a slight dip. But Mira knew what that meant. Nobody was flying this aircraft. She looked around desperately. There had to be an emergency release. Some way for flight attendants to get in if the pilots were incapacitated. She found a small panel next to the door. Instructions were printed in tiny letters. In case of emergency, when there is no response from the cockpit. She followed the procedure. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The smell hit her like a physical force. Both pilots were slumped over the controls. The autopilot was engaged, but the plane was slowly descending. Warning lights blinked across the instrument panel. Alarms beeped softly. Mira stood frozen in the doorway. This was insane. She was 17 years old. She had never even sat in a real cockpit. But she looked back at the cabin full of unconscious people, at the altitude indicators showing they were dropping steadily, at the artificial horizon tilting slowly. Nobody else was coming. Nobody else could help. She stepped into the cockpit and sat in the co-pilot seat. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the controls. The yoke felt heavier than in the simulator. The dashboard was a nightmare of switches and screens and indicators. But it was also familiar. She had studied this exact model in her game. Boeing 737. She knew where the throttle was, where the flaps were, how to read the altitude and airspeed. She pressed the button for the intercom. Her voice came out small and terrified. This is Mira Chun. I am not a pilot. Both pilots are unconscious. I am going to try to land this plane. If anyone has any flying experience, please come to the cockpit immediately. Silence. Nobody came. Of course, nobody came. The passengers were all unconscious or close to it. She was alone. Mira looked at the navigation screen. They were over the ocean. The nearest airport was 40 minutes away. She checked the fuel gauge. Enough to make it. Barely. She adjusted the heading. The plane responded sluggishly, but it turned. She tried to remember everything from the simulator. Maintain altitude. Watch your airspeed. Keep the wings level. Do not overcorrect. The chemical smell was making her dizzy. She tied her shirt around her face. It helped a little. The autopilot kept the plane steady, but it could not land. That was going to be all on her. She radioed air traffic control. Her voice cracked as she explained the situation. The controller on the other end stayed calm. His voice was like an anchor. Okay, Mira. I am going to help you. What is your altitude? She read the numbers. 28,000 feet. Good. What is your airspeed? 240 knots. Perfect. You are doing great. Just listen to me and we will get you down safely. The controller walked her through every step. How to reduce speed. How to begin descent. How to configure the flaps. Mira followed his instructions exactly, but her hands were still shaking. Sweat poured down her face. The runway appeared in the distance. A thin strip of grey against green fields. It looked impossibly small. The controller told her the approach speed, the angle of descent, when to lower the landing gear. She did everything he said, but as the ground rushed up toward them, she realized how fast they were actually moving. The simulator never captured this. The visceral terror of hurtling toward Earth in a metal tube. The runway was coming up fast. Too fast. The controller told her to pull back gently on the yoke. Flare the nose. Up just before touchdown. Let the rear wheels hit first. Mira pulled back. The nose lifted. The plane seemed to hover for an impossible moment. Then the wheels touched down. Hard. The plane bounced. Mira's heart stopped. She pulled back again. The wheels hit a second. Time. Harder. The plane shuddered violently. But it stayed on the runway. She slammed on the brakes. The plane screeched and screamed. Metal groaned. But they were slowing. Slowing. and then they stopped, right in the middle of the runway. Emergency. Vehicles were already racing toward them, sirens wailing, lights flashing. Mira sat frozen in the pilot's seat. Her whole body was shaking. She could not believe they were on the ground. She could not believe she had just done that. The emergency crews flooded the plane. Paramedics rushed through, giving oxygen to the unconscious. Passengers, both pilots, were carried out on stretchers, alive but barely. Everyone else was alive too, bruised, shaken, suffering from chemical exposure, but alive, all 207 people. The investigation revealed that a cargo container in the hold had been leaking industrial solvent. The fumes had been pulled into the ventilation system. Both pilots had been overcome within minutes. If Mira had not broken protocol and entered the cockpit, everyone on that plane would have died. The Aviation Authority reviewed the black box recording. They listened to her shaky voice on the radio, watched the telemetry data showing her unsteady but ultimately successful landing. They called it a miracle. But it was not a miracle. It was a teenage girl who had spent 2 years playing a game that everyone told her was a waste of time. It was courage in the face of impossible odds. It was someone who broke the rules because sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to survive. Mira became famous overnight. News crews camped outside her house. She received letters from around the world. The airline offered her free flights for life. Flight schools offered her full scholarships. But she did not feel like a hero. She had nightmares about those moments in the cockpit, about all the ways it could have gone wrong, about how close they had come to disaster. The pilots both recovered after weeks in the hospital. They sent her flowers and a handwritten note thanking her for saving their lives. Passengers tracked her down to tell her they named their newborn babies after her. A woman told her she had gotten to see her son graduate because Myra had landed that plane. A man said he walked his daughter down the aisle at her wedding 3 months later. These were the moments that helped Mira understand what she had really done. She had not just landed a plane. She had saved futures, weddings, graduations, birthdays, grandchildren who had not been born yet. Every moment those passengers would ever experience existed because of what she did. The aviation industry changed its protocols after Flight 427. Now, if pilots become incapacitated, there are clearer procedures for trained passengers to access the cockpit. Flight simulators are recognized as legitimate training tools. And airlines started programs to identify passengers with simulator experience. Who could assist in emergencies? Mira eventually went to flight school. She became a commercial pilot. And every time she sits in a cockpit, she remembers that day. The terror, the impossible choice. The moment she decided that doing something was better than doing nothing. She tells young pilots her story, not to scare them, but to remind them that flying is not just about following procedures. Sometimes it is about trusting yourself when every rule says you are not qualified. Sometimes it is about being the person who steps forward when everyone else has fallen. Mira Chun was just a teenager playing a video game, until the moment she became the only thing standing between 200 lives and oblivion. She broke the rules. She saved everyone. And she proved that heroes do not always look like we expect them to. Sometimes they are 17-year-old girls who refuse to give up even when the odds are impossible. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.